Hello, I'm the Comics Kid 2099, and I'm here to talk to you about my collection of graphic novels. I'm only going to be talking about the X-Men shelf for right now. I'm starting with these little guys. These are Superhero Squad figurines. I just love collecting these. I don't have many of them, just enough to fill up my top 3 shelves here. But I don't even have figurines from comics that I read. Like, I don't read a lot of Hulk. I barely read any Iron Man at all. But as I go through, I'll try to show you all of these, and you'll see that they're from comics that I don't really read, but I still like having the figurines on my shelf. So I just wanted to go through here. There's a Hulk from Planet Hulk. I think that might be the Black Widow's Iron Man suit from the Ultimate Universe. There's the Abomination, maybe from the movie. Sandman. And there's, I guess, a War Machine suit. And I'll get to the next shelf in a minute. Like I said, this is the X-Men shelf. I have a lot of the essential volumes. Without the essentials, I wouldn't be able to read 90% of the X-Men books that I have. I know people like to bash on the essential books, but like I say, without them, I wouldn't be able to read the X-Men books I do. They're in black and white, and that's the biggest complaint that I hear people level against these, but that doesn't really matter to me. They're in bulk, and most of these, they only cost you about $15 if you buy them new, and that's not a bad price at all for 30 issues, give or take. Having said that, these first 3 books here collect the Silver Age of the X-Men. The first 66 issues, and then this volume collects a handful of appearances in other books. I think there's a Marvel team-up issue, there's an issue from Spider-Man, a couple of issues from the Hulk, all of the 6 issues of, I think, Amazing Adventures that the Beast appeared in after X-Men was done. There's not a lot that's fantastic from that first 66 issues. I think what I had the most fond memories of was Arnold Drake's run, and I don't remember who the artist was on that run. I guess starting in 67 to 93, the series was reprints from that first 66 issues. And then here is where Giant Size X-Men issue 1 starts, and that was written by Len Wein and drawn by Dave Cockrum. And then after that, you have Chris Claremont on the book, and he was on what would become Uncanny X-Men for 16 years. Basically, he is the reason that X-Men is the juggernaut that it is. And I'm not going to talk a lot about his run, but you'll see that most of what I have on this shelf is from his run. And then over here, some of the first stuff that's not from the main X-Men title. We have 2 Captain Britain books, and that's, you can see there, Alan Moore. That's a pre-Swamp Thing, pre-Watchmen Moore. And then later it was by Jamie Delano, who is well known for writing Hellblazer. And we have Claremont and Frank Miller's Wolverine miniseries. I'd like to do a full-blown video on that someday. Let's see, New Mutants. This first book, it wasn't the best. I didn't enjoy it when I read it, and then I don't remember what possessed me to get Volume 2. Probably it was just that it was an X-Men related title, and I'm an X-Men fanatic, so I try to pick up as many X-Men books as I can. But I remember really enjoying New Mutants Classic Volume 2 much more than Volume 1. And then we have these Alpha Flight volumes. There's 2 of them here. I think the 3rd one is coming out in December of 2012 or January of next year. Really enjoyed that. I think my biggest complaint is just it's so verbose. John Byrne, I don't feel like John Byrne is very much of a writer. He's a much better artist than he is a writer, I think. And I know in the 90s he did some stuff that I liked quite a bit more than this. But my favorite thing about this run was the backup issues that were showing you this team before their chronological first appearance over here in Essential Volume 2. That was a lot of fun, and he would kind of do stuff a lot like that later on in Next Men, which I really enjoyed, and that was with Dark Horse. In this miniseries, Magic, Storm and Illyana, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Ileana had been introduced earlier, but this was showing her time in limbo. It had ramifications in the Uncanny X-Men and New Mutants title for several years to come. X-Men vignettes, you can see there are 2 volumes here. In the 1980s, about 10 years after Claremont had started on X-Men, there was a series called Classic X-Men, and then later it was called X-Men Classic, and it reprinted stuff starting with Giant Size X-Men issue 1. And those issues would have the old issue reprinted, and then there would be a new story, a backup story at the end of the issue. And most of those backups are collected here in these 2 volumes of X-Men vignettes, and those are really good. Follow the Mutants. What else? Arthur Adams Legends. This just collects various, I think a couple of annuals, some Fantastic Four stuff. I'm not a huge fan of Art Adams. He's okay, but he, for a very long period of time, it seemed like he was doing the annuals while other artists were handling the monthly issues, and I just didn't care for those issues. I would always roll my eyes every time they would come around and just kind of soldier through them to get to the stuff that I actually liked. And then over here, one of my favorite spin-offs from this time period, Excalibur. Up here, I believe I have 3 volumes. I've got a 4th volume over here that I haven't read yet, so it's not on a shelf, but I cannot say enough good things about Excalibur. It's by Chris Claremont and Alan Davis, who you can see was over here on Captain Britain. By this time, this was very late 80s, early 90s, and a lot of people, I think, were getting tired of X-Men. It had accumulated about 15 years of long-running continuity by this point, and I think people were just kind of getting fed up with that. So Excalibur was a place where they could still get very relatable characters, a very relatable character-driven drama, which was what you could find in X-Men, but without the 15 years of stories that you might need to understand that drama. So Excalibur provided a clean break where you could get the same things that you enjoyed about X-Men that was easier to penetrate. And interestingly enough, when I was reading X-Men, I did not like Kitty Pryde or Rachel Summers. Those 2 characters I could not stand in the X-Men title. But then when they hopped over to Excalibur after the Mutant Massacre, I started liking those characters. I really liked them both in Excalibur, but when they were in X-Men, couldn't stand them. And right now I'm rereading Essential X-Men Volume 2. So as I go through these Essential books, I may try and take note and see what it is specifically about those 2 characters I did not like. And now we're getting to the 1990s. I know some of the books here in Essential X-Men Volume 9 were very early 90s, 1990 I think. Then here we have the Barry Windsor Smith Weapon X story that was collected in Marvel Comics Presents. A lot of people really love that story. I enjoyed it, maybe not as much as everyone else. I'll say that the 1990s is probably my most sparse decade on my shelf. The 90s, like I said, I think it started about here or here, one of those, and it ends about here. So not a very lot from the 90s, but part of that is because I think Marvel hasn't collected a lot from the 90s. I know there's significant stretches of issues that haven't been collected. Mainly what's been collected are big events. The Operation Zero Tolerance recently got a hefty sized book collecting that I do not have. I know the Onslaught Saga and the Age of Apocalypse both have multiple volumes collecting those issues, and I don't have those either. I'm not in a huge hurry to get those, but I will someday. So that's why I don't have a lot from the 90s. I've got a couple of events here. This Magneto book is where he took control of the island nation of Genosha. It's either Genosha or Genosha. If you're watching this and you know how it's pronounced, I'd love to hear how I'm mangling that. Then the Phalanx Covenant, which is where Generation X got their start. Interestingly, I think Marvel is putting out multiple volumes of the Generation X stuff. There's a book called Generation X Classic Volume 1, which basically collects the same stuff that's here, plus an extra issue of Generation X. And then there's a Generation X Classic Volume 2 that's very recently been solicited, so I will jump all over that, because I really love the Scott Lobdell, Chris Bachalo, again, something else I may be mispronouncing. I love their run on Generation X. Both Cyclops and Phoenix miniseries, I enjoyed one of those a whole lot, and one of them I did not care for. We'll let you take your guess which one. Just a couple of little small events from this run, like all three of these are kind of not very well known. That was right around the time, well, shortly after this is when I started reading comics, actually, or maybe a year later. But these are pretty insignificant. I'd like to do a video sometime of them. And then we got a couple of books here. I started reading X-Men stuff, just comics in general. I started reading toward the end of Joe Casey's run on Uncanny X-Men. And now you can see Uncanny X-Men Poptopia is here. That is the beginning of his run. The end of his run has not been collected in trade. So I weep nightly because of that, because I really enjoyed his run. I'm not sure how well it holds up now. I know Poptopia is okay. It seems like a retread of the Mutant Massacre in a lot of ways. But I really enjoyed his X-Corps storyline, and that has not been collected. So get out your pens and write angry letters if you enjoyed that storyline. But here we have like Peter Milligan and Mike Allred's X-Force. I really enjoyed that series. Grant Morrison's New X-Men. I love the beginning of that run. As it kept going, I think I started enjoying it less and less, but what's collected here is just magnificent in my opinion. And you get a foreword by Bruce Timm, famous for his work in the DC animated universe, and then the Morrison Manifesto, which infamously people really love or really don't, much like his run itself. I won't talk a lot about why I dislike his run, or part of his run, but this beginning run here, it's where I think Morrison was able to streamline everything about X-Men that people loved, and then he was able to just gently ignore all the stuff that made people not want to read X-Men. Because by this point, the X-Men had been around for, I don't know, 40 years, and it was becoming a burden to read X-Men, it seemed like, and that's what the 1990s is famous for. That might be another reason why I don't have a lot of stuff from the 90s. I came in as Grant Morrison had maybe less than a year left on his run, but I really enjoy the beginning of his run here. I cannot say enough good things about how that's probably, his run is a good reason why I'm reading X-Men. Over here you can't really see it, but there's the first volume of The Exiles. That's a series I really enjoy, mostly because it's just easy to read. You don't have to have 40 years of history and knowledge of that history in order to read Exiles. Down here, I'll let you see these Superhero Squad figures. There's another Hulk. I might have got that at a yard sale, but I think it originated from Burger King. Yeah, I think it did. Yep. Ironmonger. And this little guy is a Grabzags figurine of Loki, and that's courtesy of the fine folks at Geekvolution. They hosted a contest, and I won this little dude and a couple other toys that you won't be seeing in this video. So I have him here with the Superhero Squad guys. This is Count Dooku from Star Wars. I think I got that at a yard sale. And then Iron Man and Red She-Hulk. Okay, back over here. Now there's the Wolverine Origin. So I enjoyed the Origin mini, but I don't know if that's a popular opinion or not. Some Extreme X-Men. As I said, Chris Claremont, he started on X-Men in 75, and then he left, I think, in 91. He came back to the X-Men in the early 2000s. Actually, it was late 90s on Uncanny X-Men. And you saw some of that up there with Dream's End and Eve of Destruction, I think. And then he moved from Uncanny to Extreme X-Men, which, despite the kind of hokey title, I really enjoyed Extreme X-Men. I don't have a lot of it in trade. I have a couple of volumes, but I'm looking to try and complete my trade collection of Extreme X-Men and see if I can read it all in one sitting, because I really enjoyed that. You see more Exiles here. The rest of Grant Morrison's run on New X-Men is in 2 more volumes. There. Ooh, right there. Chuck Austin's run on Uncanny X-Men, happening around the same time as Grant Morrison finished up his run on New X-Men. Easily one of the worst X-Men runs ever. We'll come across some other stuff that I think is equally bad, but Chuck Austin deserves every lump that he gets online. But Chuck Austin's run is just horrible. And then the Weapon X series by Frank Thierry. This book here, one of the first trade paperbacks I got. Probably this series doesn't hold up too well now. It's basically just the Weapon X program has restarted, and they've put together a team of mutants where they are going to take care of the mutant problem. That's kind of in line with what the Weapon X program was about initially. It was a whole bunch of C-list characters like Marrow, Mesmero, Sauron, Wildchild, Aurora. It doesn't really hold up with their personalities that were established before this series, but when I first read this, I didn't know about their personalities before this series, so I still have a soft spot for that run. I think it ran about 30 issues, but only half of that is collected. I don't really know why. These 2 volumes here, and this one is kind of hard to find. The Underground with Cable there on the front, but I enjoyed what I read of that series. We have more Exiles, more Chuck Austin's run on Uncanny. This series here, New Mutants by Christina Weir and Nunzio de Flippis. That's another one that was starting right around the time when I was seriously getting into X-Men. And that introduced some characters who are still pretty important today. I don't know how heavily featured they are, but they are Hellion, Rockslide, Prodigy, Elixir. Those guys are all introduced there. And another series where only half of it is collected. This series ran for about 14 issues. I think there are 6 issues here. The rest of that series was not collected. So, shame. Marvel doesn't seem to understand how that collection thing works. More Exiles, Chuck Austin's run. Here we go, District X. Basically, this is like a cop drama with mutants. This is Bishop from the X-Men policing Mutant Town with a human partner. And I really enjoyed that series. Collected in 2 trades. I have them both. Highly recommend them. I don't have a lot to say about it. If you like cop dramas, then you'll probably like that a lot. Whedon's Astonishing X-Men. I used to have that run in singles. I'm not the raging fanboy of Joss Whedon that a lot of people are, but this is a run that it started off just phenomenal. And it actually, in my opinion, it got worse as it went along. But part of that wasn't his fault, and part of it was. But I really enjoyed this run. I have it in omnibus. It's the only omnibus I have. And then over here, we have one of the volumes from Chris Claremont's Uncanny X-Men, where he followed up Chuck Austin. And I really enjoyed his run on Uncanny right here. This was where he had Bishop, Rachel Gray, who she was calling herself now, Wolverine, Storm. This run, it wasn't very long, but in a lot of ways, his Uncanny X-Men run here felt a lot like his Uncanny X-Men run from the 70s and 80s. Just really great stuff. I need to get the rest of the trades on that run. I don't have them all, but I'd love to find them and read them. Let's see, a couple of minis like New X-Men Hellions. This was the first time that characters like Hellion and Rockslide and his whole team, the first time they were getting a lot of screen time of their own. it's okay. If you have read any comics with them now, you're already used to them as main characters, so it's not going to have the same effect that it did to me. Phoenix Insong, which, okay, don't really have a lot to say about that. House of M, that's where, in my opinion, the slow decline of the X-Men books started with House of M. I am not a fan of Brian Michael Bendis, and I'm not a fan of the House of M miniseries. I have it because the spine art here that would have the logo of the House of M, it would look kind of silly if I didn't have all the books, and I actually don't have all the books. It really looks more like Hijia of M instead of House of M. But I hope to get the rest of those books someday. I'm just not in a huge hurry. Basically, if you're interested, some of these tie-in books are a whole lot better than the main event itself. I'll do a video someday on House of M and just why I hate it, but it's bad. Peter Milligan's run on Adjectiveless X-Men. Peter Milligan's run here, this is the run that I feel like is as bad as Chuck Austin's run. It is just horrible. Very, very bad. And it's one of those things, I didn't even notice how bad it was when I was reading it in singles, but it's not good. And I don't have that whole run in trade. I know at least one of the trades in that, one of the graphic novels in that run is very hard to find, Blood of Apocalypse. So I don't have it. I'm missing a couple. And here's, speaking of bloody awful, Weapon X, Days of Future Now. This was a mini-series that was, I guess, supposed to be a sequel to Frank Thierry's Weapon X run, but it also was trying to tie into the Days of Future Past world, and for some reason it was trying to tie into Wolverine escaping from the Weapon X program way up here. So, yeah, bad. Really bad. I can't put into words. A couple other minis. We've got Colossus Bloodline, which is just laughable how bad that was. This is the book that whoa, I just dropped Loki. It suggests that Colossus is related to Rasputin from the royal Russian family, so that's kind of idiotic. And then more Peter Milligan. I think it's interesting that Peter Milligan did the X-Force stuff and the X-Statics, which I really liked, and then he did X-Men, which I really hated. After that, we've got more Claremont on X-Men. Got Ed Brubaker on Deadly Genesis, which, I haven't read that in a long time. I have a feeling if I reread it, I will not like it. We got some Decimation, which I don't think I liked any of these. Son of M was okay, but I definitely didn't like this or that. And I think I'm missing like one or two more books, but, I'll get to them if I get to them. Some Civil War stuff. Here we go. Mike Carey and Ed Brubaker, they both started on the two main X-Men titles at the same time. Ed Brubaker on Uncanny X-Men with Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire, and Mike Carey on Adjectiveless X-Men. This collects the whole first year of his run, but it was not a year-long story arc. Like Ed Brubaker was doing a year-long story where the Uncanny team was in space, and I actually enjoyed Rise and Fall at the time, but I have heard people really complain about it, and when I hear their complaints, it makes a lot of sense to me. The team being, it seems like there was not a lot happening if you were reading it on a month-by-month basis, but since I read it all at once, I didn't have that problem. I may reread it someday, and my opinion may change. I don't know. I have a lot of Mike Carey's run in trade, but I just haven't read it in a long time. I read a good portion of his run from when he started all the way up till about Necrotia when I stopped buying single issues. And that is where I stopped, but I have several the trades from his run that I'd like to reread someday. A few more minis, like War Song, the World War Hulk X-Men, which I haven't read in a long time. I'd like to. This is the second trade for Brubaker's run. Did not like that story. And then the second trade for Mike Carey's run, Blinded by the Light. For some reason, that's really hard to find. I lucked up and found it somewhere. We have a mini that kind of follows up on the events of Rise and Fall. I didn't much care for it, I don't think. At this point, I was aware that basically it seemed like there was no end to it. Each event just leads into more events, and I'm not a fan of that. That's one of the reasons I don't like House of M, and that was the same principle going on here. Rise and Fall doesn't really end, it just kind of stops, and it leads into this, and it leads into more stuff. Die by the Sword, kind of the same way. Chris Claremont was doing Exiles and Excalibur at that time. I've heard that both of those were not so great. This run, Wolverine Get Mystique, happened right after Messiah Complex, and I enjoyed it. I'm not sure how well it meshes with Wolverine's history and Mystique's history, but I don't really care very much. I thought it was an enjoyable story. That's about all I have to say. A couple more things. Divided We Stand also happened right after Messiah Complex. Wolverine Logan. I am going to do a video on this book someday. It is fantastic. It is by Brian K. Vaughan, who I have mixed feelings on, and it is by Eduardo Risso, who is a phenomenal artist. And I'm not going to say any more, but I really love that book. A couple more things here as tie-in to Secret Invasion. That was by Mike Carey, but I was actually kind of underwhelmed by it. It wasn't bad, but it was just not great either. Not what I expected from Mike Carey. And then the X-Men Angel Revelations. I thought that was a pretty enjoyable book. Again, didn't knock my socks off, but I enjoyed it. X-Men and Spider-Man by Christos Gage. One of the worst things I have ever read in my life. This was terrible. I may do a full video on that one day. It's just, And then X-Men Sword. Let me see if I can pull this out here. This is, if I can summarize this, it's basically if X-Men and James Bond had a baby in outer space. It's really great. It spins off from Joss Whedon's Astonishing X-Men. It has the Abigail Brand as kind of the main character. It's a lot of fun. I think if you see this somewhere, buy it. I don't think you'll regret it. We're coming to the end on the X-Men stuff. I'm not going to talk about all this stuff over here. I may do that in another video. X-Factor Forever. This is a lot like the other Forever books, like X-Men Forever and New Mutants Forever. This basically says what would have happened if Louise Simonson had never left X-Factor back in the early 90s. I haven't read her run on X-Factor, so that book doesn't really resonate with me as much as I think it would for somebody who has read her run. But someday I do plan on getting her run in the Essentials. You may have noticed that I don't have any of the Wolverine Essentials or the X-Factor Essentials, but mark my words, they will someday sit on these shelves. And then I've got one of the Astonishing X-Men mini-series from Warren Ellis, which this, I had some... I may do a video on that someday. I didn't really care for it. And then Chaos War X-Men, which ties into Chaos War. And I didn't like Chaos War at all. That's the X-Men stuff. I have a lot that is not yet sitting up here that I haven't read. I plan to read it very soon, but that's the two X-Men shelves in order to the best of my abilities, going from 63 all the way up to just a few years ago. And that's my X-Men collection. So thanks for watching, and let me know what you think. And just remember, you don't have to take your clothes off to have a good time. I'll see you next time.